Oh, there you go.
Okay, you guys are welcome to start.
Oh.
I'll let you go first, Alyssa.
Hi, everyone. I'm Alyssa Bravo. I'm Comanche. I'm an advocate here at Hesea Advocate Program. I've been on for almost 2 years now. A little bit on that. And then, yeah, here's my bio.
And my name is Monycka Snowbird. I'm Anishinaabe. I'm the program director at Hesea. This is all just the boring stuff that we had to fill in this space. So, I mean, you're welcome to read that at some later point. It's not very exciting. So I've been at Hesea. It'll be 4 years in January. The program is just a few months predating of me. So we've grown a lot in the last few years for sure. So Kelsey told us that there was a good mix of people on this call. So whether it was about half non-native and half natives roughly. So normally if we were talking to just native people, we would be skipping over all of these things that we all already know. But at the same time, if we are working with non-native folks on here that are working with Indigenous survivors, you can't effectively work with Indigenous survivors if you don't have a little bit of background regarding history and how we got to the point where we're facing violence against our relatives that we're facing now. So we are based here in Colorado Springs. We do Indigenous specific advocacy for survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, stalking, and human trafficking. You have to be Indigenous to be in our program, and you have to live within El Paso County currently. At some point, we might be able to expand to other areas outside of Colorado Springs, but that's where we're at right now. So some of these numbers are a little bit old while we're waiting for the new census info to come up. So we've got 6.7 million Native folks in the United States as of 2006. There's over 21 states now that have over 100,000 Native residents. That includes Colorado. And there are 574 federally recognized tribes in the United States. We have 2 reservations in the state of Colorado. 48 tribes have legal ties to the state of Colorado, though, even though they don't have reservations here anymore. A lot of people assume that all natives live on reservations when in fact 78 to 80% of us now live off the reservation. That's nearly 8 out of 10 native folks. So we are definitely all over at this point. So if you live in a major city, you most likely have a significant Indigenous population in your community, even if you don't know where they are. So the new census, we got a training on it the other day. It says it's actually over 100,000 now along the Front Range, but I could not remember how to pull that data. So the data we could pull does show a little over 80,000 along the Front Range of Colorado. So that's not the entire state, that's just the Front Range. It was an urban relocation area for people that left the reservations, especially, we'll go over that history a little bit later. In Colorado Springs, School District 11 has a Title VI Indian education program, and they have members of over 126 tribal nations here in just Colorado Springs. Alyssa, you want to hit these statistics?
Yeah, so more than 4 out of 5 American Indian and Alaskan Native women, 84.3% have experienced violence in their lifetime. More than half of American Indian and Alaskan Native women have experienced sexual violence in their lifetime, 56.1%. More than half of American Indian and Alaskan Native women have experienced physical violence by an intimate partner in their lifetime, 55.5%. Almost half of American Indian and Alaskan Native women have been stalked in their lifetime, 48.8%. The vast majority of American Indian and Alaskan Native female victims of sexual violence experience violence at the hands of a non-native perpetrator, 96%. Native women also face murder rates more than 10 times the national average in some countries. Alaska Native, Native American, victims of violence are less likely to receive needed services.
And that all the statistics are from the National Congress of American Indians, the research project they did in 2008. So they're not the most current, but one of our issues as far as dealing with violence against our Indigenous relatives is getting accurate and updated data. If you're already doing advocacy with Native folks, you can probably recite all of these statistics in your head because we all use them all the time. So a little bit of background of US policy. We're gonna share the slides. So we're just gonna fly through this real quick. We're not gonna go over everything in extreme detail. So to be Indigenous in now in 2021 is a political act. So there were very systematic and intentional policies by our US government to eliminate our people. And here are a few of them. So we had the Indian Removal Act of 1830 signed by President Jackson. We had the Indian Citizenship Act in 1924. So a lot of non-natives don't realize that we did not have US citizenship prior to 1924 on our own land. The Indian Relocation Act of 1956, it was encouraged for Native folks to leave the reservation for vocational training. Denver was one of the relocation cities, so that is why Denver has such a large a generational Indigenous population there. Between the 50s and the 80s, 750,000 people roughly migrated to the cities from the reservations. So we didn't have the right to vote in every state until 1962. If you were Ute and living on one of the two reservations in Colorado, you could not vote until 1970 in Colorado. So that is not very long ago. The American Indian Religious Freedom Act of 1978, many of our ceremonies and our traditions were illegal up until that date. Indian Child Welfare Act was enacted also in 1978. We just had the anniversary of that last week, I believe. 25 to 30% of all Native children in the United States were being removed, and 85% were being placed outside of their family and communities. So Colorado has less than 30% ICWA compliance. I'm actually being fairly generous there. I think it's actually between 23 and 27%. The county where we live in, it's even a little bit lower than that 27%. I'm putting you out there. I'm putting you on blast, El Paso County. So the boarding school era, I'm sure many of you have heard of that with all the recent media, but that went from the 1860s to the 1970s. Right now we have over 7,000 Indigenous children found at the different boarding schools between the United States and Canada. One of the issues regarding the boarding school, and we're going to go over that a little bit more, is that the Merriam Report of 1928 documented extreme abuse, malnourished students, recommended that these schools be shut down, and then the last one didn't actually shut until the 90s. And Bravo of 2013, and so 2013, let's remember that was not very long ago. It reinforced the tribe's jurisdiction to prosecute non-Native tribal members on reservations. So prior to that date, if you were a non-Native perpetrator, you went onto the reservation, raped an Indigenous person, got off the res without being caught, the tribal police couldn't prosecute you because you weren't a tribal member, and the local jurisdiction couldn't prosecute you because it took place on tribal land. So that is, it's not a perfect change by any means. It is specific to domestic violence and sexual assault. It does not include other crimes currently. It is growing. Each tribe is handling that a little bit different depending on their resources, but it is a step. So again, 2013. Manifest Destiny. So we've all seen this picture on the top by John Gast from 1872, where it was essentially destined by God to take Indigenous land and expand westward. The picture on the bottom is a current, more appropriate response, where it is an Indigenous woman taking back what was lost. A lot of people initially, when they look at this gas painting, thought that she had a Bible in her hand, and actually it's a school book. If you zoom in on it really close, I don't know how to do that while I'm sharing a screen to show you, but it says school book on there. So if you look at, she's white, there's light coming behind her, and then what's in the darkness that she's running out, it's Indigenous people, it's buffalo, and then here it's us taking these things all back. So I like this painting a whole lot better. So boarding schools. So we talked about Pratt a little bit in another slide, but a great general has said that the only good Indian is a dead one. And that high sanction of his destruction has been an enormous factor in promoting Indian massacres, Pratt said in 1892. In a sense, I agree with his sentiment, but only in this, that all the Indian there is in a race should be dead. Kill the Indian in him and save the man. So that was the philosophy, the guiding philosophy of Indigenous boarding schools between the United States and Canada. A lot of these boarding schools had cemeteries, jails, and crematoriums. How many school systems do you know for non-Indigenous people that had cemeteries, jails and crematoriums. When they're finding our children on these properties, that many times they are in unmarked or mass graves. So these are some handcuffs that are at Haskell School, and then here's the Sherman Indian School Cemetery. We did have 3 boarding schools in the state of Colorado. This is a pretty famous picture from Carlisle. So these children were removed forcefully from their homes and sent to government-funded boarding schools. The Catholic Church also ran the majority of the faith-based schools. They were places of horrific abuse. Physical, sexual, emotional, along with starvation were very commonplace and extremely well documented. By 1926, 83% of our children had attended a boarding school at some point in their life. And like we said, as of today, almost 7,000 children have been found. And there's not a whole lot of media coverage about that right now. And when you look at these young people were coming home after experiencing this abuse, coming home to the reservations with all of this trauma, no treatment, no therapy. You can then imagine how that has impacted generationally other families. And then right after this, they were a lot of times subject to the Relocation Act. So they didn't quite fit in white America, but then they also maybe didn't fit in their traditional cultures as well. And then they were moved from the res to different cities across the country. So that's historical and generational trauma. These are some of the ways that systems can do that: destroy our foods, remove a person from their cultural practices, and change the identity of a people. It's all separate. It all contributes to an attempted genocide. So sterilization was also an issue. For sterilization between the 1960s and 1970s, IHS doctors sterilized 25% of all Native women of reproducing age. So, and I'm not saying 25% in South Dakota or 25% in Minnesota. I'm saying 25% across the country of our people were sterilized. Again, that contributes to the documents or the documentation of the attempted genocide against Indigenous folks. So, and how does that impact us today? We have a greater risk of experiencing psychological distress. We have some of us have poor overall physical and mental health. We have very high suicide rates. We all know that experiencing high levels of trauma and ACEs contribute to chronic health issues. So like diabetes, heart disease, obesity. And then this is just a picture of Dr. Maria Yellowhorse Braveheart, the cumulative emotional and psychological wounding over the lifespan and across generations emanating from massive group trauma. So that's kind of how we got to where we are today. And I need to learn how to share my screen. Okay, so that was a very quick crash course in Native history. We did that in 18 minutes. So now Alyssa's going to talk a little bit about our program and the specifics that we do.
Hi everyone, so we are Hesea Advocate Program. We do Native specific advocacy for Indigenous survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, or stalking here in El Paso County. We do that as a one-on-one intense advocacy. So we treat all of our survivors as if they are our relatives, creating a sister space.
And that TP is from Tallbull Memorial Grounds, where we take a lot of our survivors for camps and like just cultural immersion programs. And I don't know how to switch screens. Okay, go ahead, Alyssa.
Oh goodness. Okay, so all of our services provided. So we offer support for victims emotionally, just kind of however we can. A lot of times our survivors are currently trying to leave the violence, or they're trying to escape. They've already escaped, or it's years after, and now they're having to do that self-work, which is hard, ugly, but it is very necessary. So sometimes we, as advocates, we receive calls at, normal times within the day, or we can receive them at 8, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, whatever time, just looking for, support and, how can I work on grounding myself? How can I don't want to feel like this, like I can't breathe. So we just kind of help them. We stay on the phone with them. We meet them where they're at in whatever capacity that is. So we advocate within systems. So if they need to get on public benefits, we go with them and we get all of those packets, which can be very overwhelming. You know, you have TANF, you have CCAP, you have WIC, you have food stamps, all of that stuff. And so we kind of help them get that paperwork going, kind of guide them as, okay, we're going to turn this in, prioritize that just a little bit better. Educate victims on kind of what kind of violence they were experienced, you know, financial abuse, sexual abuse. A lot of people don't really understand what coercion is and how that can play an effect with sexual assault. We work to reduce barriers for victims. So if they have transportation is one of our biggest barriers. That's when we become mobile advocates and we pick them up bright and early on a Monday morning, Tuesday morning, whatever they're looking at, and we take them to the courthouse, or we take them to DHS, or we take them to all of these appointments directly related back to the violence. So I mentioned earlier how we create a sister space. That is, you know, how would we treat these survivors, our participants, if they were our cousins, our aunties, our relatives, just all of that. And then safety planning and help with protection orders. Protection orders are lengthy. They are not fun in this ugly process. And it's also, that's a lot when to ask somebody, all right, here's this much space. Now tell us about the worst incident and how long it has been going on for. So we've spent hours on protection orders, and then it's like 3, 4, 5 pages. And then even then making sure that they're okay. They're not leaving us completely broken, going home and, you know, being complete in distress. Legal advocacy. So when we take them to the courthouse, it's hard to maneuver. You know, you got this tower, you got this tower, you're going to go into this room, South 101, you know. And then we just kind of help them with the process looks like if they're in DV court, criminal court, whatever they're looking at. Okay, well, this is what the judge said. This is what can happen. Here are some options. I'm just a DV advocate. Let's connect you with another well-known resource, such as, the Justice Center. We love them here in Colorado Springs. They do free legal advice every Wednesday night from 7 to 9 p.m. You can talk to a lawyer. They are amazing. And then court accompaniment, just making sure that we're there for the protection, turning in the protection orders, helping them fill it out, going with them to each and every hearing that they need, even if that is ICWA court or, you know, kind of going and just seeing what the case is, wherever they're at. Sometimes they're at the very beginning. Sometimes they involve us, you know, 2 court cases out. And then that's where we start to do a lot of that work together, women's groups. We do culturally based parenting. So we are both certified for positive intent parenting and the nurturing parenting program. I believe that they are both, or one of them for sure, is state certified through DHS. What was that, 1, 2?
Both are okay. Both are covered for court order parenting classes and for Department of Human Services requirements.
Awesome. And then we do financial classes too. And that is a sticky situation, understanding what one's relationship with money is, and then understanding how financial abuse works, and then kind of recovering your credit or even working towards home ownership. All of that's encompassed in our financial classes, which are actually beginning to start up tomorrow evening. And that's a 6-week course. We do the Purple Purse curriculum from, Allstate, and then the First Nations, what was it?
First Nations Development Institute.
Yeah, thank you. So we provide information regarding back to sexual assault, domestic violence, dating violence, stalking, and human trafficking. We have plenty of pamphlets. We also do women's groups. So we have a lot of handouts that we give out, and we have one for red flags, green flags, and we kind of talk about in between. We also bring in our own lived experiences to that, so that we're able to kind of create that trust space, like that space of trust. And then we refer to many different agencies. We partner with a lot of different agencies to make sure that their needs are being met in whatever capacity that is. I mean, you should see our referral book.
And in those referrals, we also don't just hand someone a referral book. We do, and we don't even do warm handoffs. We go with them to those referrals. We have vetted almost every agency in Colorado Springs to find out who it is we would want to work with and who we would not want to work with. It's very labor intensive, and those resources are constantly changing, but we want to make sure anyone that we send our survivor to, or we take our survivor to, is going to treat them with respect and dignity. And we want to make sure that it's a safe space and it's a culturally appropriate space. Because there are some agencies in town we will not refer to, no matter what. And then there's other agencies that we will send someone to, like, oh, you can go meet with this person at this agency at this time, and we know that we don't need to go. And then other times that we will attend with them as well. One of the other things that in this picture here was supposed to be my office as the program director, but that's weird colonization way of thinking. Like, there's 3 of us. What do I need a big office for? So we turned it into a clothing pantry. So we have court appropriate clothes in there. And Alyssa named it My Sister's Closet. So you can go in there and get free clothes. We used to say professional clothes, but then we realized the word professional was very subjective and not always court appropriate. So women can go in there and get outfits for work. They can go and get outfits for court. We don't really have a limit on how much they take. And we also, Native women like our bling. We like our earrings. Alyssa, where's your earrings today?
I got them on.
So, yeah. So we started taking donations of Native jewelry. And not like cheesy Native jewelry that you find at the mall, but like legit beadwork, like, bling. And so we have that available for our survivors as well. We're a little bit more selective on how much of that they take, just so that we have enough for everyone, because, beadwork is very expensive. And we are dependent on a lot of our friends and network providers across the country for those donations. We also have a food pantry. That's another little weird office space that we don't utilize. We do have phenomenal connections with our local food pantries in town, but sometimes Saturday at 9 o'clock at night, someone might need some food to get them through till Monday. So we may not be able to access a food pantry that way. So we have our own stash. We also have hygiene products as well. So, and one of the things that with court advocacy and court accompaniment, we always try to put ourselves between the survivor and their abuser. So like if he is in custody, and I'm using, I shouldn't be using gender specifics on that, but if the abuser is in custody and we know where they're going to be in the courtroom, we make sure that we put ourselves between that abuser and our survivor, so that they can't make eye contact and they can't do any sort of intimidation during the court process. So I still don't know how to switch screens. Okay.
Hold on. We have a question in the chat.
Cool.
Go for it.
Okay. Hi. If I may ask, what terminology do you use when referring to individuals who have access services from this program? Client, patient,
participant. So I think sometimes we'll say client, depending on, not to those people, but like if we're in a setting where we're talking to other providers, if we say participant, they may not know what that means. But we don't use client intentionally, because that implies some sort of power dynamic that, they're my client or they have to answer to me. When we use participant, because they are choosing to participate in our program, and they dictate what services they get, to what extent, the frequency of those services. Our program participants guide our program, so they decide what it is they need, and then Alyssa and I figure out ways to fill in those voids. That's how we do that's why we had parenting classes, because we had a lot of women complaining about the parenting classes that DHS was ordering them to go to and how they were just awful. And they're not wrong. So we started doing our own parenting classes. Our basic job is to remove barriers for our survivors. So whatever it is they need, that's what we put in place. So Alyssa's going to talk a little bit about our housing program here real quick, and then we're going to go back to another part of that question, like second part of that question at the end of that.
Yeah, so we have a transitional housing programs, which is subsidized housing. The only 3 qualifying criteria is you have to be over the age of 18, you have to be homeless or doubled up, and then your last incident of violence has to be within 6 months of your submitted application. From there, we do, I think like 1 to 4 months, we pay a certain percent of it. And then after that, the next few months, we dock that. And then we continue to dock that up until the year mark. And then at that year mark, we hopefully continue to eliminate all of those barriers that you had identified, work with you on your goals, so that now you are fully kind of independent on your with your housing program, with your wherever you are with job placement, even career development.
We talked too about we've had squirrel. So part of our housing program, part of the financial program that we do as well, is we've had 3 women go from homelessness secondary to gender-based violence to home ownership in our program. We want to make sure that our survivors know that that is a reality. Well, up until the housing market in Colorado over the last year, that was a definite reality, that we could help them get to a place where they could purchase their own home, get our land back one backyard at a time. So in the program that Alyssa's talking about, we don't own any physical property. We don't operate a safe house. So we subsidize the rent. The lease has to be in the survivor's name, and then we pay the landlord a check each month, and then it gets reduced quarterly based by the number of people that are in their household. And they can opt to not participate in that program at any time. It's not a guaranteed on that. So one of the things our participants talked about is that they weren't able to get like nice things for their house, and it's a dignity issue. There's a certain agency in town. I wish they were on this call so I could call them out, but I don't think they are. And they give garbage to Indigenous people. And I'm bougie, but I'm not like that super picky about like what's garbage and what's not, but you will not give my people scraps. And so our people were going to these places to get things, having to work for it in their warehouse, and then having things that like maybe even thrift stores wouldn't accept. So we got this amazing contract with Bed Bath & Beyond. You should all reach out to the Bed Bath & Beyonds in your communities. It's through good360.com. For $750 a year, you get weekly donations from Bed Bath & Beyond that are all of their returns and their clearance or discontinued items. It averages about like 4,000 a week, 5,000 a week of like bougie Bed Bath & Beyond stuff. So every woman in our program has an Instapot, has a Shark vacuum, has an $80 pillow, has a $500 comforter set.
They have UGG curtains, the shoes, and the comforters.
We don't get the shoes donated. So if they get UGG shoes, that's on their own. And so those are things, and you can, as you participate in our program, again, going back to the terminology, you can choose to participate that you only get the Bed Bath & Beyond stuff for your new place. You can choose to come to groups. You can choose to come to ceremony. You can choose to do parenting classes, or, you can choose not to do much of anything. It's really up to you and whatever the survivor needs. We help them identify what their needs and priorities are versus what we think their needs and priorities are, because those things very rarely line up. And so we are going to skip a little, and we also, everyone here does the address confidentiality program. I feel like probably if you're an advocate on here, we all do it. Nikki's on here if you have any questions.
Hey, Nikki.
So we have an Indigenous healing garden here in Colorado Springs. It's called Pieth Kitnanath. I do not speak Ute, so for the Ute people on the call, I am so sorry. So Alden Naranjo, who was the former Tribal Historic Preservation Officer for the Southern Ute Nation, named the garden for us. He told us that means the plants that heal. This is one of 3 spaces in the state of Colorado off the reservation that is specific to Indigenous people. So we have 2 lodges there now. We have an east-facing lodge and we have a west-facing lodge now. So no matter what your teachings are, we have you covered. This garden is open to just our Indigenous community, is not open to the public, and we are happy to say, no, you are not welcome here. Go over there. So we do cultural teachings. They do lodge about once a week out there now. We have social gatherings. We just did a big Halloween celebration out there. We do women's group. We do full moon celebrations. We really need to get better pictures here.
It looks so much cooler than what these photos are right now.
Yeah, someone remind me to do that. So we have a medicine wheel garden where we grow tobacco, cedar, sweetgrass, and sage that our participants can harvest if they need to. We grow medicine. We don't really grow much food right now because we don't have water until next year. So we have to haul the water, but we grow only Indigenous plants that are used for either food or for medicine. And we use that to also teach the women in our program or the men in our program to identify those plants at different stages of their seasons. And then when we go out on hikes, we can identify those plants that way. So and we teach them how to harvest them, when to harvest them, and what to do with them once we do harvest them. So let's see, where are we at with time? I don't even know what time it is. 12:34. We are flying through this. So everything we do is culturally centered. So When I first came on the program, we didn't really have any Native staff or any Native participants, which was weird for a Native program. So now we have all Native staff, all Native participants. And so everything we do is very, very much culturally centered. So we do kayaking, harvesting the medicines like we had just talked about. Can you guys see my mouse if I point on this? So we were harvesting some green thread, or for I saw that there's a lot of Dene names on here. So Navajo tea, Ojibwe tea, but this is an Ojibwe woman picking this, so this makes it Ojibwe tea. We did a buffalo harvest where the survivors in our program helped to break down this specific buffalo. This is a picture of one of the full moon celebrations. We've taken groups out kayaking. We have 8 kayaks for our program. Technically, that's me denying the fact that I'm a kayak hoarder and I have 8 kayaks on the side of my house, but I wanted to get paid to kayak, and I came up with a cheesy way to do it during the social distancing from the pandemic. We couldn't have our regular groups because we couldn't gather that way. So I thought, well, if we put everybody on a boat that's naturally socially distant, because each boat is like 10 feet long, and it ended up being a huge success. The women in the program love the kayaking. We've shared water teachings, water stories, water songs. It's very empowering for our survivors to get out there on that water when they've been told that they're not capable or not competent, and then they're out there on a boat on their own, paddling big reservoirs in Colorado. So luckily here in the Springs, there's a little tiny lake about a mile that way from where I'm at right now. And so we teach them how to kayak on that, and then we go out onto the big water. We've had cultural immersion camps at Tallbull Memorial Grounds in Sedalia, which is like halfway between here and Denver. We've done regalia making, both ribbon skirts and moccasins, food sovereignty. We've made tea together, like we've mixed different teas together. So there's probably a lot more stuff on here that I can't think of right now that we have done together. And so Alyssa, I'll let you talk on leadership opportunities.
Oh goodness. So let's see, leadership opportunities. So we try to bring our survivors out into the community a little bit more. I mean, we're pretty, we have a big, good sized community here in Colorado Springs. So we try to make sure that they're involved with anything that goes to city council. Let's see, we've had Indigenous Peoples Day passed here. We've organized some Native vote things for the state of Colorado, not state of Colorado, but we've been involved with some other Native votes. And then right there in the top right corner, those are some youth actually participating and signing and getting registered to vote for the first time. So that was pretty incredible. Just being able to see everybody, again, going back to what Monycka said before is, they're being told that they're not able to, that they're not good enough, or, like they'll never be able to do anything more than this. They just have to be content with where they're at. And that's not the case once they start leading rallies, being able to speak in front of school districts, speaking to other, executive directors at, foundations like El Pomar, which has significant amount of leadership trainings, and they are amazing. We love them. Just anything to help them build up their resume, anything to help them build up their own confidence with either that's public speaking or, develop a career path, whatever they identify they want to work towards.
Yeah. So, advocacy for survivors isn't just the protection orders in the court. It's healing of that person and that family as a whole. Indigenous women specifically we tend to be leaders across the country and our communities. We tend to do a lot of that organizing. And so we work really hard to create safe spaces for our survivors and our community as a whole to continue to do that work here in the Springs. So these are all pictures of some of the voter awareness things that we did and some of the PSAs for COVID that we did here in Colorado Springs. So some of our civic engagement, separate from our leadership or in addition to the leadership training, and this is only if a survivor expresses interest in doing this. We don't force anyone to smash the system, So like I said, we try to create a safe space. A lot of times Indigenous folks in urban settings don't have seats at all the tables. So Alyssa and I work hard to kick in those doors and get those chairs and have that set up for our participants when they're ready to kind of take back their voice. So our survivors have been involved at literally every single level. They helped draft the MMIW proclamation for our city, which was then very closely copied by Governor Polis for the state. Our survivors helped to draft the Indigenous Peoples Day proclamation, and then the resolution that is now permanent in Colorado Springs. We've organized all of these pictures that you're seeing here. Our survivors were involved in the organizing and participating in all of those different rallies. So we've had MMIW walks. We've had, as you can see, everybody there in the orange shirts. We had an honoring for the children who didn't make it home from the boarding schools. Several of our survivors have testified in both the Senate and the House in regarding to Indigenous specific legislation. We definitely believe that first you heal yourself, then you heal your family, and ultimately your community.
Before we get into that, Alice had mentioned that we must have a lot of survivors or participants to offer those kind of services. So going back to the statistics earlier in the slides, at that rate, 4 out of 5, more than half, all of that stuff. So some of our survivors, we have a good caseload, about 50, 60, somewhere in there, just between the two of us. But also, we have a really big community here in Colorado Springs. So if we know that there's survivors, but they don't necessarily want to come in to do an intake, we also offer those services to them too.
Yeah, so we have I know this is being recorded, so I apologize in advance, but we had a survivor comment on the fact that her butt was on like 6 of our newsletters one time. And I went back and looked, and yeah, she had a great butt. And it was because of confidentiality, we can't post people's faces. So all of the photos that we would use were people's from behind or like close-ups of their hands, like doing something culturally relevant. So we came up with an idea to start an Pikes Peak Indigenous Women's Alliance. Is that right?
Pikes Peak Indigenous Women's Alliance.
Yeah, I think that's right. And so that we have a group now of about 100 women that a good chunk of them are our survivors in our program who have completed an intake or actively on our caseload. And then about half of them aren't. Only Alyssa and I know who is and who isn't. And so in that, we are able to build a really positive peer-to-peer support system. That's a space for us to potentially get new participants if someone is not comfortable coming to us right away, maybe seeing us at events that we're doing, or that one of their friends or their relative is working with us. Everything we do is confidential, so we wouldn't be the ones identifying that. They can reach out to us that way. It's very supportive, and there's not any of that lateral violence or cultural shaming in that group. And then it also helps survivors if they want to talk to the media. They don't have to identify themselves as a survivor with Hesea. They can say they're a member of the Pikes Peak Indigenous Women's Alliance. If they don't want to identify where they work, then they can say that they're with that agency, and it's super informal. So like a Facebook social group. So, yeah, but as of last month, we now have a men's program. We've done a lot of talking, and if any of you come to rallies, we always talk about how it's all ribbon skirts all day. We don't see a lot of our men showing up to a lot of our events. Sometimes some of our organizers, and I've been guilty of this myself, we've kind of been like, well, where are the men? Where are the men in these? Why is it always the women doing this? And then when the men show up, we're like, well, where have you been? And so we kind of, that's not welcoming, that's not encouraging, that's not a call in, that's a call out. And we realized that we were only healing half of our community by doing this work. Like our women's programs across the country, like we have it dialed in, like we're not doing anything cooler than what anybody else is doing. But very few people are working with our men. And so we kind of were kind of like, what would it be like if we did this? And then we found funding, and now we do this. Or we will be doing this. So we hired a man that both Alyssa and I have known for a while. He's going to be working primarily with Indigenous men who are struggling with sobriety, who are offenders. These are some of the things that he's going to be doing. So offender groups, career readiness, parenting classes, cultural supports. Desmond also pours for the men's lodge that they're doing at our garden space right now. This is a brand new program. It has the longest name, I think, of any program ever. So it's the Indigenous men's path of wellness, ethical responsibility, and emotional development. I don't remember that unless I'm reading it off of a slide. So if you want more info about that, Des's contact information is right there. This is a program of HSIA, so Des is the program coordinator. We wanted him to come talk about this, but he's sitting over there and doesn't want to come over and talk about this with us. So
Calling out.
yeah. We already called him in. Now we can call him out, you know. So, he's not looking at me. So working in partnerships with non-native folks. This is for you. This is who we're talking to. We respectfully ask that you strive to be our allies. Ally is not a title that you can apply to yourself. That is a title that is given to you. If you have to tell me you're an ally, there's a very good chance that you are not. If you are doing the work, I should already know about the work you're doing versus you having to point it out to me. So working as partners, how can you undo all of those historical things that we talked about earlier and how it corresponds with what we're doing today? Trust is built in a process through action. We've had some people contact us from other agencies that say, oh, on your website, it says, you know, these are your trusted partners and we're not on there. I'm like, yeah, you're not. So why is that? And what can you do to fix that? So you cannot work with Indigenous populations, especially as a non-Indigenous provider, unless you really delve into the historical context for violence against our women. When did this start? 1492. Columbus began violence against our women and girls when he started selling children to, or gifting children to his crew for rewards. So 8 and 9-year-olds documented that in his own journals. So that and you know, when Alyssa earlier talked about the statistics, 96% or 92% of the violence against our people is not at the hands of Native perpetrators. So a lot of times man camps play a big part in that. Violence against the land goes hand in hand with violence against our women. I think that is a Ryan Redcorn quote of some sort that I'm twisting around a little bit. So consider your role in supporting our right to self-definition and self-determination. So we didn't start these issues against our people, but we have our own solutions to them. We don't need other people to necessarily come in and save us or show us how to heal our own people. So identify local Native-led community resources and make sure it is a Native-led community resource. Just because someone says they do Native work does not mean that there's any Native staff, does not mean that their board is Native or their leadership is Native. And just because they put a dream catcher on their logo does not mean they are culturally appropriate to deal with our people. So arrange for local Native people to provide advocates with cultural information and resources and compensate them to do that. Do not expect Native people to come out and educate your staff for free. You would be paying other populations to do that work, so you need to make sure you're compensating Indigenous folks too. Know when to step back, know when to stay in your lane. Like I said, we can and do this work for ourselves. When we have these culturally specific curriculums, Alyssa and I have noticed that since COVID, our survivors are not going back to abusers. They are not getting in new relationships with new abusers. And that is because of that cultural foundation that we are helping them to reconnect back to. So don't believe that what applies to one tribe applies to all of them. 574 different tribal nations, over between 200 and 300 different languages. What is okay for Ojibwe folks is not okay for Dene folks, and vice versa. They do not eat reptile. If you bring reptile to a potluck, those grandmas will be mad at you forever. So even if you label it. So be regularly and intentionally inclusive of Native people, not just during the month of November. We exist 12 months out of the year, not just during Native History Month. Understand and respect our sovereignty and be patient. We don't necessarily always do things on non-Native schedules, so, or in a non-Native capacity. Here is some of our contact information. These office hours are kind of silly. We're open, like we're available 24/7. So we're not really doing walk-ins right now in our office just because of COVID, but we do have times that we bring our survivors to the office. So like Alyssa's at the office right now, I'm at my kitchen table. So, and here's our direct contact information. Little epigenetics reference here. If we can carry historical trauma in our genes, then we can also carry resiliency, and we do. So I think, is that the last slide?